Hey everyone, it's Jananie and welcome back to my channel, The Story Ain't Over. So today I'm coming to you with one of my most exciting videos of the year, which is my top 10 favorite books of the entire year. So I say this disclaimer every time I do one of these videos. These are not books that have come out in 2020, but they are books that I've read in 2020 that I have loved and that I think are the best books that I've read this year. I'll be honest, this wasn't a great reading year for me. I only read about 55-ish books, and a lot of that was due to the fact that I was adjusting to working full-time this entire year and just this year in general. So I am not going to go too hard on myself for not, hitting like 100 books or whatever, because that was never my intention nor goal. I just wanted to read as many books as I could and I feel like I had a pretty good reading year, and there were definitely some really great books that I read this year. So I'm obviously gonna tell you all about those books today. So I'm gonna go in reverse order. I'm gonna go from number 10 to number 1. These are kind of ranked, but I did overall love all 10 of these books, so any of these are great to pick up. Alright, so the 10th best book of this year for me was Parachutes by Kelly Yang. So I kind of debated whether to add this book on this list. It was on the fence at the end of this list with a bunch of other books that I had also read this year that I also really enjoyed, but I think this one really stood out to me because of the way it dealt with the subject matter and just the unique kind of story it was telling, and also the representation and the characters of this book because they were just so endearing. But basically Parachutes follows two different teens, Claire and Danny. So Claire is a girl who's living in China, and her parents kind of send her off to be one of these parachutes in America, who are these wealthy Asian children who are sent off to America to study there. And then our other main character is Danny, who is this Filipina-American girl who is kind of struggling with money. She and her mother have been cleaning houses for the wealthy people in her neighborhood. And the point where these two characters meet is when Claire is sent off to the United States and she is made to live with her host family, which ends up being Danny and her mother. And so the two of these characters are kind of coming head to head, but this book deals with a lot of other subject matter, including sexual assault and rape, and it has a bunch of triggers for that, so I'd be careful of that, but I think it was dealt really well, and it comes from the author's own personal experience if you read the acknowledgements. So I thought it was just so well done, and it was kind of fast-paced, a really great read, and I loved being in the heads of Danny and Claire and just seeing their own personal struggles and how they were dealing with it. But I definitely feel like this is a totally underrated book. Like, I don't know a lot of people who have read this, so I definitely want more people to pick it up, and that's also part of the reason why I wanted to include it on this list, because I feel like it's just one of those books that deserves a lot more love. Okay, now we're on to number 9 on my list, and I definitely had to go with Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. So for those of you who have been following my channel, you know that I went on a total Tiffany D. Jackson binge this year, and I am so glad I did because she is just amazing, and she writes some of the best kind of YA thrillers with some really deep and interesting subject matter, and I absolutely love them all. But I definitely think Grown was probably my favorite from this year. It was also the one that came out this year, but this is kind of a difficult book that follows the young teenage years of this young girl named Enchanted, who has these big aspirations of becoming a singer, and she goes off to this kind of like competition or audition thing, and she ends up meeting this huge R&B star named Corey Fields, who sort of takes an interest in her. And this is not a happy book in any way, shape, or form. This is a book that follows a kind of older man kind of preying on this young girl, and her going through the emotional journey as she is manipulated by him and coerced by him and all of these different things. And she is such a young girl. I think she's like 16, but it is also a really strong tale of empowerment, and it actually starts with a framed narrative of Enchanted waking up in an apartment where Corey Fields has been found dead. And so you're also in the back of your mind trying to figure out this kind of murder mystery that occurred in the future while you're also hearing the backstory of what happened with Enchanted and Corey. This was overall just an amazing and incredible book, and I was on the edge of my seat the entire time wanting to know what happened. And I think that with all of Tiffany D. Jackson's books, she just delivers on such amazing and flawed characters, and you're seeing their journey and growth throughout the book while also touching on some really important themes. Alright, the next book that I want to talk about is number 8 on my list, and I absolutely love this book because it was a sequel to a beloved book of mine, and that is The Silver Serpent by Roshani Chokshi. So this is the sequel to The Gilded Wolves by Roshani Chokshi, which came out I think in 2018, and it was one of my favorite books of that year, and it's just been one of my favorite like fantasies of all time, just because because of the way that it is kind of a historical fantasy, but it deals with colonialism and it takes perspective of many different diverse characters from very different backgrounds, and you're seeing how colonization has kind of affected their lives, and also how the very unique magic of the world, which is called forging, which relies on kind of objects and their power and where they come from, how that affects their lives. And so this was the brilliant follow-up to The Gilded Wolves, and I honestly feel like I enjoyed this a lot more than Gilded Wolves. It was a lot more fast-paced and a lot more contained, and the places where Gilded Wolves dragged, this didn't, and I just loved seeing the immense angst in this book. I have said this every time I talk about this book, but I just love angst between characters that I love, and so seeing that in this book was just so much fun, and it brought me so much joy. And I also just loved learning so much more about each of our characters and hearing more about their backstories and just seeing them interact, and I just kind of loved this entire book. Like, it was such a treat and such a great time the entire time. So yeah, it was just one of like those great reads where like you're returning to characters that you love and you just have a great time. All right, next is number 7 on my list, and this is one that kind of came out of left field because I decided to pick it up on a whim at the end of this year, and this is actually my like second last read of the year, so I finished it like literally 2 days ago before I'm filming this, and it was amazing and I needed to include it on this list. So that book is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. So this is an adult fantasy that involves a lot of East Asian history, specifically the Second Sino-Japanese War. And I had heard so much about this book from different bloggers, booktubers, and people on book Twitter, and I knew there was just so much excitement and the love for the series, especially because the last book was coming out this year. And so I kind of jumped on that bandwagon and I was like, okay, like the last book is out, so I can just binge the series. So I decided to buy the first and second book and just pick up this one, and I'm so glad I did because it was so freaking amazing, and I'm so glad I was able to end off the year with this great read. It is definitely an adult fantasy. It has tons of triggers, especially towards the end of the book, so be super careful of that, and there's just a lot of blog posts online that can kind of tell you about the triggers and stuff, so I'll leave those linked down below. But overall, this was just an amazing book. It kind of follows the life and growth of this young woman named Rin, who starts off as like a child. She's like maybe 11 or 13 or something at the beginning of the book, and she is this young war orphan who has been raised by a foster family that kind of hates her, and she's trying to escape her small country town and her foster parents, and so she decides to study for the national exam that will get her into one of the like top academies, military academies, and she hopes that she can kind of just escape her station in life. She perseveres in so many ways, and she is such a strong character, just her indomitable will and her desire to get what she wanted. But there was also a bunch of other characters that I absolutely love, including this mentor character and a lot of Rin's friends along the way, and she goes through so much growth in this book and also ages like 10 years in this book, so it is one of those grand fantasies, and I think it was just so well done and so well written, and also like really hilarious at some points as well. So it had so many things going for it, and I think that it was just definitely one of my favorite reads of this year, and I cannot wait to continue with the series, and I can probably say already at this point that one of the later books is gonna be on my top 10 list of next year. So yeah, just super excited about that, and I just had so much fun with it. So if you were looking for an adult fantasy to pick up, like highly recommend this one because it was just so refreshing. Also because it wasn't just like the regular Western setting, it was like an Asian setting, which was really nice, and I just loved it. All right, we're on to number 6 of this list, and this is another one that kind of came out of left field for me because I didn't actually know anything about this book, nor had I heard anything about it until like right before I had actually picked it up. So about a few weeks before I picked it up, someone had recommended it to me and said that they had recently read it and loved it, and that was actually Mika from Mika August. She's another booktuber, and she told me that she loved this book and that I should pick it up, and I was like, okay, this seems super interesting, so I will pick it up, and I ended up loving it, and that book is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. I've talked about this book in multiple different videos, so I'm sure a bunch of you who watch my videos would have seen this coming, but I absolutely loved this book. It is the first book in a contemporary fantasy series, kind of an urban fantasy series. It follows our main character Bree following the death of her mother, and she's trying to figure out kind of what happened to her mother, because although the police say that she was in a car accident, there seems to be something strange going on, and maybe even something supernatural. And so she's going off to this like prep school, prep college thing at a university, and she starts to kind of uncover this secret society going on there called Legendborn. And this book draws heavily on Arthurian legends and the, you know, whole concept of King Arthur and the Round Table, but it also draws on a lot of history And it was just this really beautiful and interesting blend of like both the contemporary world, but also like our historical past and like the past of America, and also like this really incredible legend. And so basically where like the action kind of happens is when Bree is trying to infiltrate the legend born from the inside and potentially even take it down. And this was a whirlwind ride. I loved every moment of it. It was definitely on the longer side, but it was just so enjoyable, and I loved Bree as a main character. She's just such a strong character. But there's also a bit of a love triangle in this book, not like a super strong one in this book, and I feel like it's just gonna get like more intense in the future books, but there are kind of two love interests in this book, and I honestly adored both of them, but there's definitely one that I liked a little bit more and just fit my taste a little bit more, and I just loved the whole situation, and I thought it was just really well done, and I think she built both characters up really well. So highly recommend this if you're looking for like an urban fantasy with a black main lead, with like, you know, that BIPOC main lead, because I think it really makes a difference in the situation where you're getting that like extra perspective and something different than we're usually used to. All right, we're on to number 5 of this list, so we're halfway through, and this is another book that took me totally by surprise because I kind of picked it up on a whim. I really liked the cover, and I had heard quite a few people on Bookstagram kind of talking about it and just posting pictures about it. So I decided to pick it up on a whim when lockdown kind of started, so earlier in the year, and I was so glad I did because I just loved every moment of this book, and that is Anna K by Jenny Lee. I absolutely love this book for so many reasons, but I think it just fit my particular taste, and I personally just loved it. Like, I don't think it's a book that would be universally liked, but I personally really loved it. And basically this is kind of a retelling or reimagining of the classic Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, with the main characters as teenagers, these wealthy teenagers in New York, and you are seeing kind of the Gossip Girl-esque relationships between them and the way that they're conducting their lives. And so it follows our main character, Anna K, who is half Korean, who kind of returns to New York in her hometown to help her brother out with a situation that he's got going on with his girlfriend. And she ends up meeting this young man named Alexia Vronsky, who is known as the Count, and he is another kind of wealthy teenager in New York, but the kind of crux of this thing is that she's already in a relationship, and so this deals with like the whole Anna Karenina situation, but in a really interesting way, and I just honestly really love this book, and I can't really pinpoint exactly why, but I think a large reason why I love this book was the writing style. The way that Jenny Lee writes this book is just so poetic and just so wonderful. It's not the writing style of regular YA contemporary. It definitely feels grander and just more all-encompassing. I don't know if that makes sense, but I felt like I was just getting swept off my feet this entire book, and I just wanted to know what was gonna happen. And overall, I just fell in love with Anna K's story. And regardless of kind of what happens in the book, I think I was just really invested in Anna K as a person, and there is gonna be a sequel to this book. It's called Anna K Away, and it's coming out in 2021, so I'm super excited for that, and I just can't wait to see where Anna K's story is gonna go. But this is definitely a really great book if you really liked Gossip Girl, but you wanted more like POC main characters. Like, this is a great one. All right, we're on to number 4 of this list, and this is one that I kind of expected to be on this list because I was so excited about this book the moment I heard about it, the moment I heard about the concept, and it's also written by an author that I really love, and that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. So I know this is a favorite for a lot of people this year, and I know it's a not so favorite for a lot of other people this year, but I definitely am one of those people who loved this book. It was a lyrical and magical read, and for those of you who don't know what this is about, it follows the life of this young woman named Addie LaRue, who is living in like the 1700s France, and she dreams of a life beyond her small town and wants to see more of the world and not fall into this pattern of just getting married young and having children and being locked in this one town. And so she has a friend in her small town who has always warned her never to pray to the gods that answer after dark. But Addie finds herself in a very desperate situation, and so she ends up doing exactly what she was told not to do, and she prays to the gods that answer after dark. And a god does answer, and you don't know if it's the devil or God or who this thing or person is, but it's a sort of darkness, and it grants her her wish. And so it allows her to live an eternal life, a immortal life. She never grows old, she never ages, but she's forgotten by every single person that she ever meets. And so anytime she meets someone, the moment she leaves their eyesight, she's forgotten by them. And so she ends up leading this invisible life as she travels the world and, you know, lives her immortal life. And she's locked in kind of this eternal dance with this devil who wants her soul and wants to claim it and wants her to give up. But this is also kind of a love story. There's a character that appears in present day because this does kind of flip between Addie's life in the past and also her present day life in kind of 2014. And this is honestly such a beautiful book. It is on the longer side. It is kind of on the slower pace, but I think that structure kind of lends itself to the story. And you're calmly reading this tale of Addie who just wants to be remembered and loved and to live her immortal life and see the world. This is honestly one of those books that you just need to pick up and read and experience, and you will understand what I mean. But it was just a wonderful book, and I'm so glad I read it. And it's definitely one that I feel like I will go back to and reread at any point in my life, and I feel like I will get something out of it. Okay, now we're into the top 3 of this list. So this is one that might be a surprise, and this is kind of a surprise for me, but I honestly just love this book so much. And it's by an author that I actually really love, but it's something very different from her usual stuff. And that book is The Kingdom of Back by Marie Lu. So this was the new book that Marie Lu put out earlier in this year. She actually put out 2 books this year, so The Kingdom of Back and also Sky Hunter. But I think The Kingdom of Back is what stole my heart this year. This is something that is totally different from her usual stuff. Usually she does like a lot of sci-fi fantasy, and this does have a bit of fantasy in it, but it is more of a historical read and more of a kind of contemporary focusing on this one woman's life. But basically this book follows the life of the older sister of Mozart named Nanowrimo, and you are following her life from a child to when she gets a bit older, and you're seeing how her life has been kind of overshadowed by her brother's fame and how her own skills have kind of been downplayed because of her gender. But as I said, this involves some magic to it, and Marie Lu kind of brings to life this concept from actual history where Nanowrimo and Mozart as children would tell these stories of this mysterious kingdom of Back on their carriage rides between performances. And so Marie Lu brings this kind of kingdom of Back into the story, and the world and its inhabitants start to kind of encroach on Nanowrimo's real life and start to influence things but also inspire her. And it's just this really interesting and lyrical and beautiful read, and the writing style is just so wonderful, and it definitely was more of a literary read, and I just loved every moment of this book. Like, I whipped through it, and by the end of it I felt like I was at the end of like a musical performance, like just in awe of just this entire book and the entire story. I loved Nanowrimo as a character and loved seeing her journey, and I just overall was in love with this book. It's definitely another one that I feel like I will go back to many times later in the future and also get something out of it and also feel like there's just so much value to this story. All right, number 2 on this list is a super unexpected one for me because this is actually a non-fiction, and I usually don't really pick up non-fiction that much, and I don't actually pick up that many memoirs or biographies, but this one was just so incredible, and I feel like everyone should read this because it was just so eye-opening in some ways, but also just a really powerful tale. And that book is In Order to Live by Yeon-mi Park. So this is a memoir by Yeon-mi Park following her life from when she was a child until her present day when she wrote this book, as a young child growing up in North Korea and then trying to escape and then finally escaping to South Korea. This is one of the most like harrowing stories you can ever hear, and I can't really like say much about this beyond you should read it because it was just such a powerful book, and I felt so much for Yeon-mi, and I was so invested in her journey to freedom, and I think it's one that was so inspiring. And I can't say that I like enjoyed this because it was just such a horrifying tale to read, but I really appreciated the fact that she decided to tell her story in this way so that more people could learn about her situation and the realities of living in North Korea. All right, the final book on this list, my number 1 book of 2020. I feel like a bunch of you who have been watching this video and know my reading taste, know my favorite books, will probably see this coming. I saved this for number 1 because I just couldn't not make it number 1 because I just loved it so much and I love this series so much. And this is actually the final installment in one of my favorite series of all time, and that is A Sky Beyond the Storm by Sabaa Tahir. So this is the 4th and final book in the Ember and the Ashes series, and for those of you who have been following my videos for a while, you know that the Ember series is just one of my all-time favorites. I love it so much. I love its characters. I love the world. I love Sabaa as an author, and I was just so excited for this final installment, and it did not disappoint in any way, shape, or form. It was so amazing. I have a full spoilery reading vlog of this, so you can go check that out if you want like full thoughts on it, but overall, I just really loved it. I loved seeing these characters kind of reach their final evolved form in this book from the place that they kind of start off at in Ember and then to where they end up in this book. And it was just so like amazing and epic, and I just loved so many scenes in this book as well. Like, this is definitely one where I felt like I got so much satisfaction out of a lot of the scenes, so that was also really nice. And I'm always going to hold the series very close to my heart, so I just love it so much, and I needed to express that to you guys once again. And if I haven't convinced you the first like 100 bajillion times I've talked about the series, please go pick it up if you haven't yet. And if you haven't read this last installment, go pick it up because it was amazing and you will not regret it. Alright, but those are all 10 of my favorite books of this year. There were so many great books that came out this year that I read this year, but I think these were the top 10 that I loved the most, that left the biggest impact on me. And this is definitely a year that was a lot different than usual, as we all know, but also for my reading. I feel like I haven't had a reading year quite like this one in a very long time, where I read so few books, but also where I felt like I read a lot of impactful books as well. Like out of the 55, I still feel like I read some really, really amazing books, and these 10 are a bunch of those. And so while I didn't read as much, I feel like I read a lot of great books still, so I'm really happy about that. And I'm really excited to see what kind of books I'm going to pick up in 2021 and what my 2021 top 10 are gonna be. I love making these videos at the end of every year, and I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what your top 10 books of 2020 were. I would love to hear, like literally rank them out for me in the comments, because I would love to hear all of your thoughts and what books that you guys love this year, because I will definitely be trying to pick up some of those for next year. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Go check out my Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads in the description down below if you want to get more updates on my reading and just my general life. And I will see you in 2021 with my next video. So please remember that this story ain't over. Bye!